Yeah.
Welcome, my friend. It's
Thank you.
nice
Thank you
to
for
meet
having
you.
me.
It's nice to meet you. This is our first official personal meeting, but I know that John wanted us to talk, and I've watched your conversations with John, which I've really enjoyed. And then you did the Dialogos Encircling weekend. What we just figured out was a month ago, although it doesn't feel like it was a month ago. And
Yeah.
yeah, and so I'm excited to dive in with you. I know that you've been on quite a path. Like you've been on the kind of path that usually doesn't come with that Eastern accent in normally.
Yeah,
Your
that's true.
accent does not
That's
give away, right? Your my understanding of where you've been in your life.
yeah, that's true. This is a mostly Brooklyn accent.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Old.
funny. I used to do courses about every other month for a period of time in Staten Island.
Oh,
And I'd go out and do these circling courses, and it was so funny because I'd only at that point I had only done led courses in California, basically, West Coast, and and Staten Island, at least the part that I understood, was kind of like conservative, kind of little old mafia like conservative.
yeah.
And
Yeah, it's kind of like an outpost of Brooklyn, really. It's like a
yeah,
suburb of, like a lot of those conservative, old school Italian, half gangster kind of folks moved from Brooklyn to Staten Island as Brooklyn kept changing over the years. Yeah. Or
yeah,
as they moved up the economic ladder a little bit, they go buy a house in Staten Island, you know.
yeah. So
I
it's
was
like,
there today. I was
oh,
there
you were
today
there
for
today.
about, yeah. And my daughter mentioned something about how she saw on the phone that I was in New York, and I told her I was in Staten Island. She goes, "Oh, I don't think of Staten Island as New York City, but it is technically part of New
Yeah,
York City because it's a weird place, you know."
this is really kind of a strange place. Well, it's so funny
Yeah,
because what I've come to understand about, I guess this is like the more East Coast you are, the more it's the case that it's a little bit harder to get in with somebody, but the once you're in for a long time, right? You're kind of lifers. Where in the West Coast, it's more like everyone's open, but like, everyone's kind of flaky. They can't hold relationships and all that kind of stuff. That's the stereotype. So when I,
there is.
so when we did these courses, right, with these old mafia guys, basically, right?
That's
Man,
fascinating.
man, it was tough. It was tough going. They're like, "What the hell are you asking me to do? Like, look at this person's in the eye. Like, this is." And then by the end, it was so funny hearing them talk because they'd be like, "Yo, fucking Tommy, I fucking feel you a lot more right there. I feel my feeling when you talk like that."
That's hysterical. That's really that's hysterical.
And it's like they broke through that, and so the experience of, and then I remember the first course. Now the whole time I had been in California, I'd gotten acknowledgments and all kinds of stuff, right? But no one had ever given me a gift. My first course in Staten Island, right? They show up on the last day with like food gifts, and someone gave me a Yankees jumpsuit, like all like flowers, and they're walking me out to the car, out to the airport, and like it was such a like
Yeah, it's a different culture.
such a
It's
different
very
culture. Yeah, it was really funny. It was really fun.
Yeah, it was weird for me growing up in Brooklyn. And when I grew up there, most of the time I lived in a very solidly immigrant Italian neighborhood.
Hmm.
But me and most of my friends were hippies,
Yeah,
and I was a yogi and all this. And,
yeah.
even my father used to make fun of me for my yoga, because he was one of those kind of guys. Like an Archie Bunker, a cross between Archie Bunker and the character that De Niro played in the movie The Raging Bull, Jake
Yes.
LaMotta. My father was a tough Italian guy, and most of his friends were gangsters. So yeah, he used to tease me and say, "Oh, I could save a lot of money on your clothes. All I have to do is give you a sheet. You could wear it like a
Oh
dhoti."
my God.
And this
Your
kind
dad
of
was
thing.
kind of a gangster
Yeah, that's
kind of
how
dude.
I grew up.
You were a
But
hippie.
yeah,
Boy,
yeah,
boy, I bet that was a weird, a bunch of weird chemical reactions with that one.
yeah. But eventually, as the culture changed, and like thanks to John Kabat-Zinn and all those studies, he finally came around to me once and said, "You were ahead of the curve with this meditation stuff. I shouldn't have teased you."
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's saying something. That's saying something. Yeah.
Yeah.
What one of the things that stood out to me in your conversation with John that I wanted to ask you about was, one of the things that stuck out was my understanding is that like as in the when you went into philosophy, you went into like hardcore analytic philosophy, right? And
Yeah.
like when I don't understand what I know about analytic philosophy is it seems to be a little bit more ahistorical. So it's a little bit more kind of calculative and like rules of logic and figuring out these kind of dilemma, like these things. And
So,
like you were having a hard time kind of figuring out how to bridge these two worlds. But what's interesting for me is like from like if you look at continental philosophy, I don't even know if those categories really hold up anymore, but like, it's a way of talking about it. But continental philosophy seems like there's a lot more room for and language, like especially with phenomenology and all of that kind of language that really opens up to something like the dimension one experiences when they meditate and have some of these experiences that you talked about having with John. um I was curious about where was continental philosophy in your mind when you were studying analytic philosophy? Like was there such a thing? Did they even acknowledge that there was another kind of way of looking at things? Or
yeah, yes and no. So two things. First of all, when I don't know if I've had a few conversations with John now. I don't know if you've seen them all, and I don't remember which one I said this in, but I had told John that one of my kind of mystical experiences was almost like a realm of Plato's forms, but I didn't have that terminology at the time.
yeah,
I only read about Plato's forms when I finally went to college and started studying philosophy.
yeah,
But after that experience, I remember thinking that it was so beyond my ability to describe that it seemed like a message to me at the end of that experience was that I had to learn philosophy.
yeah,
Right. And so
yeah,
when I told one of my yogi friends about it at the time, she said, you should go to Brooklyn College because I was living in Brooklyn. They
yeah,
have philosophy department, blah, blah. So I went there and I went into the bookstore to see what kind of books were, being required in the philosophy classes just to
yeah,
get a sense.
yeah,
And I remember reading it and going, oh, this is dry, mathematical, logical. I'm not interested in this. And I
yeah.
postponed going to college for like 8 years after high school.
Wow.
I just didn't think that's not my pet. But eventually I wound up going,
Yeah.
and all that was available at Brooklyn College. And then in grad school, I went to the CUNY Grad Center,
Right.
um, was this analytic philosophy. There
Hmm.
was one continental course being taught at Brooklyn College when I was a student, and I never took it
Hmm.
because the general attitude about the rest of the faculty,
Yeah.
which you pick up,
Yeah.
bias
Yeah.
and perspectives and everything, was
Yeah.
that was like, that was woo-woo kind of stuff,
Yeah.
almost like astrology as opposed to
Yeah.
astronomy. You
Yeah.
know, they just, and any references that you would hear from your faculty members about Heidegger or this one or that one were usually derogatory or dismissive or as
Yeah.
if you couldn't they couldn't make a state they were incapable of uttering statements that clearly expressed propositions. This is that propositional knowledge
Yeah. Yeah.
orientation.
Yeah.
Everything's
Yeah.
and it's the logic of propositions.
Right.
That's where epistemology should be.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be anywhere else. And that so I internalized all those biases, even though I
Yeah.
was very mystical and, Buddhist in
Yeah.
my orientation. There was none of that was being taught. There was
Right.
no Asian philosophy, nothing outside of that canon. In grad school, same thing. There
Mm,
was one course that one woman was teaching something connected with Buddhism.
mm,
And I remember I audited it. I sat in on the first day, and for some reason or another, I think I was so still in that mindset that I didn't appreciate the level of rigor. I thought she was really sloppy, right?
mm,
So I had
mm,
completely internalized that analytic
mm.
mindset.
Right.
But it was almost like a split personality in me. I had my
Totally.
mystical self and
Yeah.
my analytic self, and I didn't
Wow.
know. It was like a promissory note that someday I would figure out how to integrate those two things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, and only now, like this is a very strong bias among analytic philosophers that
Yeah.
continental philosophy, it's almost like the same way that they would reject or dismiss or kind of look down their noses on Asian philosophy
Yeah.
just out of ignorance,
Yeah.
thinking that that's more like religion. They don't do the kind of work that we do.
Right.
We're figuring out the foundations of philosophy.
Right.
Philosophy of language, all the rage when I was in grad school.
Yeah.
Like we're going
Yeah.
to figure out, we're going to map meaning, and then like until we figure that out, we can't do any other
Yeah.
philosophy,
As if it's
right?
just there.
Yeah, yeah, and
Right.
mean like and this is, but I mean, there's some credit to that idea, and that's the
Yeah.
idea. Like, you need to define your terms, otherwise you're talking past each other. And a lot of metaphysics only seems to make sense because it's so poetic. It's so abstract.
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
suggestive.
Yeah.
It's all metaphorical.
Yeah.
So much of it anyway.
Yeah.
So we need to really like fix what we're doing and
Right.
then start there. Start philosophy
Totally.
all over again. There's a Cartesian attitude, like
Yeah.
let's start
Yeah.
from the ground, let's get certainty, let's get logic, let's
What
get
we can
meaning, let's get all
represent.
these. Yeah, and then we'll look at all the other problems again. Many of them will go away, like Wittgenstein said. Most problems in philosophy are like a house of cards. It's
Yeah.
just concepts playing around with it. We have to become clear about it all,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
but now, I mean, once I got my PhD, I was very fortunate to get hired in a community college
Mm,
where most philosophy full-time jobs in academia, you
mm.
get hired as the expert on X, whether it's Heidegger or Neoplatonism, or you're a
Yeah.
specialist on something and you have to
Yeah.
publish on that and research on that. At a
Right.
community college level, they don't care. As long as you're publishing in philosophy,
Yeah.
that's good enough for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So suddenly had now no constraints on me. Like I have to be this excellent analytic philosopher
Right.
doing philosophy of language.
Yeah.
That was the expectation in
Yeah.
grad school. So then I was like, okay, I started reading about Buddhism, and then I discovered, just like by accident, I
Yeah.
had been under the impression that almost all of the writings on Buddhism were the things that I was familiar with just from Dharma teachers, people like Joseph Goldstein and
Yeah.
Sharon Salzberg and John
Yeah.
Kabat-Zinn, all these kind of
Yeah.
characters. And Ram Dass was one of my teachers,
Hmm.
but even though he was a scholar and an intellectual, he gave up that side of it once he became Ram Dass, even though he's
Yeah.
an excellent lecturer. You
Yeah.
know, so I was just really ignorant of how rich, even in terms of analytic philosophy, that there really is in the Asian tradition and in the continental tradition. It's just that the
Yeah.
the methodologies are different.
Yeah.
And once I started realizing that, I've just realizing like I got a fraction of the education I should have got as a
Right.
philosopher
Right.
because
Right.
I really didn't learn anything about Asian philosophy or European, continental philosophy in my formal education.
Yeah.
I've been teaching myself,
Yeah.
and just it's all been fortuitous that I find people like John or people like you and realize that, philosophical fellowship, that's a different kind of learning, and it's
Yeah.
that stuff just resonates with me
Like that.
immediately. Yeah.
I bet. I mean, what is it? What is it like kind of bringing in something like those two worlds that were split, right? I would imagine, is that an accurate description of like when you went to the Dialogos circling weekend was, and other things that I know that you're involved in like that?
Yeah. Yeah. You froze on me, but I don't know if you could
Yeah,
still
I
hear
can. I
me.
just did for a second. My it
Oh,
says it says your internet's unstable. I always think to myself,
mine? Yours or mine?
mine. It says
Okay.
mine is, yeah. I'm like, that's not the
Okay.
only thing that's unstable, guaranteed. I'm like, Zoom, you have no idea. Yeah.
So in terms of worlds colliding, you know, what's that show? Seinfeld. I don't know if you ever saw that episode with George Costanza where he says worlds are colliding because he's got two different sets of
Yeah,
friends or
yeah,
something
yeah,
like that.
yeah.
It's always been like that for me because like I grew up with those Bensonhurst mobsters. I have hippie friends. I've got academic philosopher friends. For those 8 years in between high school and college, I drove a truck. I had blue collar jobs. So
Yeah,
I fit in with the truck drivers. I've got all these different. I've got multiple worlds that come
totally.
together every now and then. But just in terms of what you asked me, like I'm saying, like I've been dealing with that my. I
Hey
think I
there,
hear you
that's
now.
me. All right. Oh, oh God, we're still recording. Okay.
Oh, okay, great. So I forget. I don't know when it went dead
Yeah, you're
temporarily,
talking
but
about like you're talking about the two worlds that you've always been in on some level, multiple levels, but the one that I asked you about,
right.
which was
Okay, cool.
which was about like what's it like for
Like
you having these.
my mystical side, and yeah,
Yeah,
and like philosophy
yeah.
somehow or another come together, and things like dialogos. Yeah, it's a really great integrative experience, and you
Mm.
know, it's kind of weird that it it hasn't been more of a part of my life. It's just weird the way my life has kind of
Mhm.
circled around. It's cyclical. Like when I was going through a divorce and I was in grad school working on my dissertation, I got involved in Gestalt psychotherapy as a client to help me through that. And
Yeah,
Gestalt, the kind of work that you do, it's
yeah,
this close, intimate listening and
yeah,
exploring. And so that's very similar. The feeling, the
yeah,
phenomenology of doing Gestalt work
yeah.
was like that at the circling weekend for
Right,
me. And
right.
so I got so much out of that. And my therapist said, you really should try out like you're a natural at this. He said, I want you to come if you're interested. I want you to come to we're having like he's part of the faculty on the Gestalt training the Gestalt Center for Psychotherapy and Training in New York City. He said our students, we have twice a year, we have these weekend retreats where it's like an intensive, and like if you come as a guest, you'll get to try out like all the different psychotherapists because all we do is practicum. We
Yeah,
do sessions, and the purpose of
yeah,
it is for the people who finish their first year.
yeah,
It's the first time they're going to play the role of therapist.
yeah,
And so everybody's playing the role of therapist and student, and they're just having you there as another person that people could have as a client.
yeah.
And A, B, I think you're done with me. You don't need any more,
Mhm.
as far as I'm concerned. He
Right.
said, but you might really make for a great Gestalt psychotherapist. So what do you think? So I went, and it was awesome. It was like the circling thing,
Yeah,
just doing this intense work for a whole weekend.
yeah,
So this reminded me of that. I fell in love with that. I did 2 years of training in it, and
yeah.
then in between the second and third year, New York State changed the law
Huh.
where I could have been a licensed psychotherapist
Yeah,
before they changed the law. But once they changed it, you have to have either an MSW or a PhD in psychology to call yourself a psychotherapist in
yeah,
New York. So at that time, and it wasn't cheap, the education, and there was no guarantee that I could get grandfathered in.
yeah.
I might have been, but it would have been a big struggle. But just around that time, I got hired full time at CUNY.
Huh.
So I was like, all right, let me throw myself into my full time gig.
Yeah,
And I never finished the training. But the experience at the Circling Institute reminded me of those
yeah,
winter and summer retreats that we used to do because I did four of them. And I love this kind of work. That was very healing and integrative for me, the
yeah,
Gestalt work. And this had the same impact on me.
yeah.
I could do this stuff all the time. I love it.
Totally. And what in this stuff? You said that it had a
So the
similar
Gestalt
feel.
work,
Yeah.
the
But,
Gestalt work,
mhm.
I mean, when you sit with a Gestalt therapist,
Hmm.
you're doing this really intense contact,
Yeah. It's all about
looking,
contact. Yeah.
listening. It's kind of like where I've seen you do it with people in your demonstrations, where it's like you're getting inside their space and you're
Yeah.
you're experiencing with them.
Yeah.
That's what goes on. And just
Yeah.
having somebody see you and you see them and you're
Yeah.
sharing and opening and trusting and
Yeah.
experimenting and just that
Yeah.
kind of I noticed a lot of these things in
Yeah.
the circling that I remember from the Gestalt
Right.
experience,
Right.
where there's similar mechanisms at play.
Right.
You've got a whole system where you've got sovereign, explorer, warrior, and all
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
stages.
All
And
those stages. Yeah.
I wouldn't try to map that onto what goes on in Gestalt. They've got their own, way of
Yeah.
describing everything. But there's a lot of the causal, functional,
Yeah.
psychological, intimacy, support, encouragement,
Yeah.
the need to be recognized,
Yeah.
for that part of you that you don't want to show people. All
Right.
those different things that happen are very healing,
Yeah. Totally.
integrative, transformative. They're
Right.
nutriments for the soul, really.
Right. Totally. Yeah. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
this connection, and I'm just curious for you, because just from where you're coming from, because I mean, this has been a mystery for me. I mean, I don't know. The closer I get to it, the more mysterious it is. Like not the less mysterious it is, right? Is because I started reading Heidegger with no background in philosophy. I have like so many learning disabilities. I'm dyslexic. I'm like the most unsuited person to be reading Heidegger and philosophy. But something caught me. Heidegger caught me, right? And that was and it was just pretty much by myself because no one else was in art school full time at that point, working as a trainer, massage therapist, and a stripper, right? And put myself through school, right? We just started doing this weird thing that I think probably by then it was called circling. And a friend of mine had this book about Heidegger, and I just looked at it and something drew me to it. I just started reading it. And I don't, for the longest time, and I can feel this deep connection between the development of circling and the philosophy, the philosophy reading, right, that I was doing and grappling with it. But like on some level, there's a real deep mystery there for me. Like this, and I think I hear it, that mystery kind of wiggles a little bit when you talked about, yeah, there's this similar thing that's going on. There's this felt interpersonal dynamic that's happening. But what we're doing, like with the circling dialogos, is where we're kind of bringing in this philosophical element, right? Like, so you can go in this realm that's like not personal per se, right? However, there's contact there, right? There's all these things going on, right? What what is this connection
Yeah.
between the two? Do you know? Are you following me or getting the gist of what
I'm
I'm asking?
totally following you. And, John could probably give us some kind of cognitive
Yeah.
science explanation for it
Right.
much better than I can. But I'll just, trust my weird intuition and try and just speak about it a little bit, from the hip. Like, I think when what resonated with you with Heidegger is maybe how McGill-Chris talks about left brain versus right brain.
Yeah.
Like the left brain is the analytic that
Yeah.
object turns things into objects and does
Yeah.
math and science and all that. And the right brain is the experiential connection with everything, so to
Yeah.
speak. I'm simplifying it. Being an art student and stripping and whatever else you said you were doing,
Yeah.
maybe you
Yeah.
were more in that spontaneous mode, so you're more right
Yeah.
brain. And
Totally.
Heidegger writes more from that side, I think,
Yeah.
than from the left side.
Yeah.
So there
Yeah.
was a resonance there,
Yeah.
on
Huh.
your end. But as far as the Dialogos thing goes, like bringing in the structure, the way that you guys lay out, like
Yeah.
you prime people by doing a little bit of you
Yeah. The
know,
ecology of
circling, or a
practices.
little
Yeah.
bit of meditation, a little bit of
Yeah.
this, a little, and you just keep going deeper and deeper.
Yeah.
Philosophical fellowship,
Yeah.
chanting a proposition, and then
Right.
just kind of playing with it. That's like Lectio Divina. Y- You've learned, maybe not just you, but
Uh-huh.
you and your
Yeah.
friends who are developing this
Yeah.
kind of organically, which is what's great about it. It's organismic, it's
Mhm.
experiential, it's like what psychologists call clinical. It's like what comes out
Yeah.
of just being in sessions, right? You're learning, things are unfolding in a way. So
Yeah.
there's some kind of developmental, you're tracking something,
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
you're receptive to something, you're
Yeah.
tracking it, you're experimenting with it. So there's a feedback loop.
Yeah.
So there's this organismic feedback loop.
Yeah.
And, it's a right brain and left brain thing. So like
Yeah.
bringing in the structure is like a little bit
Yeah.
of a left brain thing. So there's like a meta
Totally.
level, looking at how's it working and trying to
Yeah.
structure it. And so that's helping it to grow.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Totally.
it's pretty sloppy, but
Right.
and it, whatever it is that's beyond us,
Yeah.
which folks like John, like the logos or whatever you
Yeah.
want to call
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know what the metaphysics is. I've been puzzled by this, my whole life.
Yeah.
There's something going on that doesn't fit in the left brain model that I
Mhm.
got inducted in analytic philosophy.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
analytic philosophical, materialist reductionist view of reality is not capturing that stuff.
Yeah.
It's just not.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
can use that tool
Yeah.
to figure out what works when we're experimenting with this stuff,
Yeah. Yeah.
capture something,
Yeah.
and then bring it in a smart, scaffolded way so that
Mm.
we know how to prime ourselves to get in the zone, so to
Right.
speak,
Right. Right.
that zone of proximal development or whatever
Yeah.
was Vygotsky and Sixth Sense Mahalyi, the flow, all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. Somehow or another, it's working.
Yes.
I really felt, I felt it when I was in the circling thing.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
there was a similarity with the Gestalt thing because that's depth work, so it opens you up.
Right. Right.
But there's something more, that's
Yeah.
like an
The
individual and
it
a
you felt.
therapist.
I just caught
Yeah,
the it that you felt.
yeah, yeah. So I'll make a contrast again. Like with Gestalt, you're working. It's dyadic. It's
Yeah.
only dyadic.
Yeah.
You and your therapist. Whereas this, circling is,
Yeah.
I don't know what the word is for it. It's
Yeah.
multipliadic or something,
Yes. 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 Yes.
hexadic, or it depends on how many people are in the circle.
Right.
So this is something that's kind of weird, but I think it's true. And my analytic friends will laugh at me, but I've been teaching meditation or leading meditations
Yeah.
for decades.
Yeah.
And whenever I'm in a group,
Mm.
whether I'm leading it or I'm not leading it, it's more powerful.
Mm.
There's something present that's not there when you're doing
Yeah.
it by yourself.
Yeah.
There's something about minds
Yeah.
going into the zone together
Yeah.
that's shared and bigger than the individual experience.
Yes. Yes.
That happens, and that, whatever that is, that
Yeah.
it or that
Yeah.
thou,
Yeah.
that's somehow or another it's being invoked or opened or activated, whatever it is. I don't know the metaphysics or the right way
Yeah.
to describe it, but
Yeah.
it's real.
Yeah.
It's a felt reality. It's experiential reality. And what's McGilchrist, I think I was just listening to him earlier today.
He's great,
He
isn't he?
says, yeah, the experiential is what's primary.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
experiential is primary. So
Yeah.
in the circling type dialogos thing, there's something experientially real and
Right.
powerful and transformative and anagogic, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm really so happy I accidentally found John and through him you and all these
Yeah.
people, all these friends. This is
Totally.
like my tribe. You guys are like I found my tribe. That's how I
Yeah.
feel.
Well, welcome. Welcome. Glad to have you. Glad we
Yeah,
found
yeah,
each other.
yeah. You know why I say that? Because like I mean, I have a bunch of little tribes, And
Yeah.
like my original satsang, my little sangha that
Yeah.
with Ram Dass and my other two meditation teachers, the three of them, that was my first
Oh,
tribe of,
that was your first
yeah, my
group.
first meditation tribe, my
Oh,
first
wow.
meditation tribe.
Yeah.
I mean, I had my acid hippie caress, my
Yeah.
little tribe of
Yeah.
hippie yogi acid, hippie acid freak friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the next one was the yogi tribe, which
Yeah.
was Ram Dass was one of the three teachers in that group,
Mhm.
and I'm still friends. I'm still very good friends with them. In fact, if we wind up doing that Socratic dialogue thing in the
Yeah.
place where I'm trying to get it hooked up, my
Yeah.
friends have from that group still they have like an ashram retreat center upstate New
Yeah.
York, so we might go there. I'm still friends with them, but so I'm bringing them up for this reason. Like they don't really appreciate or get the utility of analytic philosophy at all,
Yeah.
right? And analytic philosophies don't get the
Yeah.
utility of this stuff at all,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I've got a bunch of different tribes,
Right.
but John Vervaeke et al.
Right.
Get both. They get
Yeah.
both.
Yeah.
So it's an
Yes.
integration that I really have been missing that integration. The closest to the integration was the Gestalt people because they got the philosophy in me.
Yeah.
They have a very philosophical component
Yeah.
and a very experiential component, but it's not integrated in the way that
Yeah.
this is for me.
Yes. 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 Totally. Totally. Yeah. Like I could imagine like a Gestalt therapist being a little bit like, yeah, are you just going out of contact right now? Like,
Yes, exactly. In fact,
right?
one of my teachers in the Gestalt school, um, what she used to say a lot every now and then. I think, are you intellectualizing your experience,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And one of the other ones there, who was a personal friend of mine. In fact, that's why I wound up going there because when I needed a therapist, I
Yeah.
called up my friend because we went to grad school together. After she got her PhD, she became a Gestalt psychotherapist. So I went to her first. But she told me when the other one used to say that a lot, she would say, Rick, she doesn't get that you and I and folks like us, we are intellectuals. We
Yeah.
like to have, sometimes we're having an intellectual experience.
Right.
That is a thing too. There's
Yes.
nothing wrong with that. But if you're trying to access your feelings and all that
Yeah.
and intellectualizing them, then you're
Yeah.
missing the
Totally.
both are good at different times and for different reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Totally. And it's funny because one of the things I know, well, it is really interesting because I know that there can be, yeah, there could be these warring tribes, right? All, as you know, right, with ashrams and different things where they kind of either either I would imagine on some level, like no one ever wakes up and says we're against that or something. It's usually not that explicit. It's more like this kind of posturing that over time, like you got to distinguish yourself from something else. And so certain things just get off limits. And I know that that's a big one about, and I think it happens a lot at kind of Eastern, probably more Indian based Eastern meditative practices, maybe like some more Buddhism. I mean, they all have their intellectual strand, but in the West version of that, generally like they're kind of like, don't think, right? Think not good, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So there is the anti-intellectualism.
Mhm.
That's one thing.
Yeah.
But there's also this kind of factionalism, like you said, or I mean, I experienced this with yoga teachers.
Mhm. Yeah.
There's this, where Ashtanga yoga is the best kind,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
kind of yoga is, oh, you're only doing that kind of yoga. So
Yeah.
I've been in the yoga world. I've been teaching yoga also on the side for
Yeah.
fun. Just really, it's just something nice to do for decades. But yeah, so I've been doing yoga for like almost 50 years,
Huh.
meditation for and all my yoga teachers, meditation teachers, also martial arts teachers,
Yeah.
almost every single one of them,
Yeah.
even the ones who claim to be eclectic,
Yeah.
there's this our way is the right way thing.
Yeah.
They don't
Yeah.
necessarily say that, but
Yeah.
like you said, you
You can
pick
pick
up
it up.
on it.
Hmm.
Yeah, and especially like the devotees of the teacher, whoever it is, there's that weird thing that you pick up on,
Hmm.
and it comes across behaviorally, and it's by osmosis that you feel like, oh, I just said something that nobody appreciates because I mentioned that other teacher that I like,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. The group super ego goes, ah, you could feel it, right? Everyone's butthole puckers for a second or something. You can,
Yeah, so it's kind of like when you're a teenager maybe and you have two or three different groups of friends
yeah.
and they you're in a weird place. So
Yeah.
like if there's these loyalty commitments or something.
Yeah.
Uh, I've been parts of so many different groups that I've encountered that like almost everywhere in my life.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
one good thing about John's network is I don't sense any of that.
Right.
Um, you guys are all doing different things and you're all collaborating freely. It's not
Yeah.
competitive, it's collaborative and it's
Totally.
inclusive. Yeah, it's really good energy.
Yeah. Totally.
I'm allergic to the opposite stuff, so I sense
Yeah.
it whenever,
Yeah. Yes.
I have
Yes.
a nose for it.
Yes. Yes. Totally. And that I would imagine is this, keeping it open like that, right? Is is going to be interesting over time. If it becomes something, one of the things that allows it to be open like that, I think, on some level, is it's hard to define where it starts and where it stops, right? And that's one of the things that's kind of interesting about it, right? And if this, whatever this is, can take hold and keep going without being that, right? That'll be that'll be an interesting feature of all of this, right? A really interesting
Yeah,
feature of all of this.
just when I see the different kinds of people that you talk to I've seen a number of your episodes, and you were talking to some guy who was, I don't remember what the episode was, but it was all talking about this thing about Christianity. He read some letter to the like, Philippians or something. I forget it was all, and it seemed like this whole Christian and there was these Christian groups like, oh, what's that guy that John talked to a lot? Paul
Yeah,
Vanderklay and
yeah,
all these different. So there's all these different places with people that they're in these
yeah,
hierarchical systems of
yeah,
I'll call them competence systems, to use one of Jordan Peterson's word. It's not
yeah,
just like a power hierarchy. These
yeah,
are hierarchies of competence. So
yeah,
somebody who's been teaching or invested in practices of a certain kind for 4 decades or whatever,
right.
out of a tradition that goes back. So there's something beautiful about that.
Oh
And
yeah,
but then when those traditions are mingling with each other,
yeah.
it can be problematic, but I love the metaphor that I recently heard from in my last talk with John, and used it a couple of places. Not the courthouse of debate, but the courtyard of something else.
Of
Dialogue?
dialogue. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Dialogue.
Dialogue.
Courtyard
Yeah.
of dialogue.
Courtyard of or
Yeah,
dialogos if you want. Yeah, totally.
yeah, yeah. And he mentions the Silk Road, the intellectual Silk Road.
Yeah, yeah,
So I mean, there have been some philosophers who explicitly address these threads of commonality running through all these things.
yeah, yeah,
But then you've got the people who really appreciate that and who are attuned to that and
yeah,
open to that. And then you've got the more enclave, our
yeah.
way kind of thing,
Right.
and that's a delicate thing. And,
Yeah,
I don't know how that's going to evolve in the future, but
totally.
it, I think as humanity is waking up to
Mhm.
all the validity of all this stuff, there seems to be more openness to the commonality rather than the differences. I'm
Yeah,
an optimist in that regard, and
yeah, yeah. Totally, totally. And I would imagine, is it fair to say that your optimism is a function of what you've touched? That's my sense is that you've touched things. Like I would imagine it'd be hard for you to maybe describe in, I don't know, circumstantial languages why you think it's why like you're optimistic. I sense more it's like you've touched something.
yeah, yeah, it's probably both. I might be optimistic by nature.
Yeah,
We all have dispositions. William James thought everybody's philosophy is more a function of a prior disposition of their
Yeah.
personality, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Might be dispositional, my optimism. In general, I've been an optimist my whole life about almost everything. Not
Right.
naive Pollyanna-ish, but that's just my nature.
Yeah.
Um, but when it comes to this, I think you're right. I've had the kinds of, I call them Gnostic experiences.
Yeah.
When John says Gnostics, he's talking about a historical group,
Yeah.
usually, with, Meister Eckhart and all that. And, so there might be some element of Gnosticism in them that are the same as in me. By Gnostic, I just mean I've experienced things
Yeah.
that the mystics talk about,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
people in different traditions say, oh, it's the Holy Spirit, or oh, it's this, or it's Samadhi, it's the Logos, it's whatever. I don't know about what it is, but I've
Yeah.
experienced things that seem quite real to me.
Yeah.
And because some of the teachings of the different worlds, traditions around that stuff ring true to my experience, and
Yeah.
they're not from just one tradition, but from many.
Yeah.
That's why my experience might be part of, like, well, the reality is that it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
it's one thing that we're all kind of a
Yeah.
part of.
Yeah. Totally.
So
Totally. Totally. It's like you kind of connected to the I recently just figured out I've heard different people talk about this. I guess it's a philosophical position, I think, where they talk about it, something pluralism, like a certain kind of something pluralism that I heard was it I think it was a video with John, who's talking with a couple other people. I forget who it was, but where I finally think I understood what that was exactly, what that meant. And it had to do with the thing I think that you're talking about, right? Which is you've touched this thing that what I heard you say is I've touched something that's really difficult to describe, that all these different things that I've been involved of have words that kind of point to it, right? Therefore, and it's not like therefore they must be talking about something like the same thing, right? And therefore, because I may be just dispositionally like optimistic, but that in itself, touching that, right, has me say that no, there's something good running through all of this.
yeah, so the word pluralism can be misleading, and
Mhm.
sometimes it almost means the opposite. Um, Depends on whether you mean like epistemic, having to do with our cognition, our knowledge, our
Yeah,
perspective, our paradigms, all of
yeah,
that. That's on the subjective side, or
yeah,
ontological or metaphysical, which is on the
yeah,
reality side, outside of our, mind
yeah,
independently real,
yeah,
something like that. But of course, if there's nothing that's mind independent, then that distinction breaks down.
yeah,
And
yeah,
people think that everything like McGill-Christ or Bernardo Kastrup, some of
yeah.
these thinkers say it's all consciousness, but
Mhm.
pluralism, I think the way you're talking about it, there's the Jains, those very peaceful people. They're not Orthodox Hindus. It's a form of,
Mhm.
non-Orthodox just means not based on the Vedas.
Okay, yeah.
So Jainism, they have a pair of doctrines. One is, I mentioned this to John, I think in the last talk I had with him. One is called Anekantavada. It's a Sanskrit term.
Mm.
The an in front of it's like atheism as opposed to theism. So
Yeah,
the first syllable is a negation.
yeah,
Eka means one in
yeah,
Sanskrit. Like
yeah,
sub ek, all is one.
yeah,
And Anta, I think, means sided, and
yeah,
Vada means doctrine, path, or way. So
yeah.
Anekanta Vada means the non-one-sidedness view.
Huh,
And,
huh.
and it's a view that
Yeah,
reality is multifaceted and
yeah,
multidimensional.
yeah,
So it's kind of plural in many
yeah,
ways,
yeah,
if it's all integrated as one. So it's kind of like it could be a Neoplatonic kind of
yeah.
thing, where the one and the many are not really distinguished.
Totally. That's
but the
exactly what
one
it is.
has many facets to it. And one of the,
Yeah.
I'm sure you're familiar with the story of the blind men and the elephant.
Mm.
Familiar
Yeah.
with
Oh
that
yeah.
one?
Oh yeah. 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 Yes. 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 Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So yeah, touching the trunk, it feels like a hose. Touching the tail, it feels like a snake.
Yes. Yes.
Touching the tusk, it feels like a spear.
Right.
Touching
Right.
the leg, it feels like a tree trunk, and
Yes.
so on, right? So they use all the almost every different Indian philosophy uses that metaphor for something else, right?
Yeah.
So the Jains use it for this doctrine
Huh.
that reality is like multifaceted, and every cognitive agent, every
Yes.
sentient being
Yeah.
is perceiving some aspect of it
Yeah.
objectively valid
Right.
from that perspective.
Right.
So it's kind
Totally.
of like a standpoint epistemology, but
Yeah.
it also corresponds with the metaphysics that no, every agent, and given its cognitive mechanism,
Yeah.
is reality is being perceived through that prism. It's
Yeah.
the same light, though. It's the same light, though,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's one
Totally.
light, and it has multiple. So that's a pluralism, but
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that there's not one.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
and then they have an epistemological, or it's more like an ethical doctrine that goes with it called syadvada. And syad means something like perhaps
Yeah.
or relatively speaking.
Yeah.
So and that's a corollary doctrine that given that reality is multiply complex and pluralistic, and each one of us, nobody has a view from nowhere. We always have a view from here or there or there
Yeah.
or there, right?
Yeah.
Um, there should be no absolute statements that X is true.
Yeah.
It's more like perhaps or relatively speaking, X is
Yeah.
true,
Totally.
right?
Yeah.
So, so what's his name? Philosopher. Well, two of them I like to mention. John Hick, famous philosopher of religion, and a former president of India who was an Indian philosopher, a Vedantic philosopher. What was his name? Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan.
Huh?
Radhakrishnan.
Uh-huh.
I love mentioning the two of them when this subject comes up. So Radhakrishnan said he had an article called "The Personal Experience of God." So
Uh-huh.
he believes in the Vedanta view that all is one.
Yeah.
But the model that he gave was that the founders of every spiritual, mystical, religious tradition were mystics who experienced that something, whatever
Yeah.
that is.
Yeah.
And it's ineffable, but they're bound to a cognitive structure and a language and a tradition of symbols and meaning.
Yeah.
And so when you come out of the indescribable, all you have is that conceptual
Yes.
toolkit. And
Yes.
so you interpret it through your culture's religious
Yeah.
symbols and language,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So somebody in the Jewish tradition has the experience, and it's going to be filtered through what the prophets before
Yes.
him said.
Yes. Yeah.
Somebody in, not even a Buddhist, he said, will,
Right.
because of their conceptual framework, they have a kind of negative view,
Yeah.
like negative theology. You can only describe that negatively. What it's not, it's emptiness. It's
Yeah.
empty.
Yes.
So they'll filter that through that language. So he thought it's still that it's all the same,
Yeah.
kind of like a Tower of Babel, where every different group is speaking a different language
Totally. It's
about
like this
something that's
hidden
translinguistic.
revealing, multiple hidden revealing through withdrawing at the same time in all these different ways, right? Like this. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and I think from his point of view, anything that gets captured in language, I see somebody crawling behind you. That's so cute.
Oh, my wife's trying to get by.
Yeah.
There you go. Hmm.
Yeah, I'm in the corner, so nobody can do that.
Yeah, totally.
Not sneaky enough?
No, you're sneaky enough, believe me.
It was very cute.
Yeah.
They're all kind of dead in a way. Like anything that you capture, now it's stuck, it's frozen. That's what it was, because
Yeah.
that thing is still moving and it's inexhaustible and all that. And the other one, John Hick, he's more of a traditional Western theist, but he also thought from empirical observation and study of other religions
Yeah.
that like the holy the pious, the saintly, the devout, the monastics, the serious practitioners in all the world's religion, they all have something in common. They
Yeah.
all have a way about them. They have an aura of sanctity. They
Yeah.
have something. It's
Yeah.
palpable, it's sensible, it's in the way they carry their bodies, the way they speak. They're more compassionate. They've all had experiences that have made them more naturally altruistic. And he
Right.
thought they've all touched something that's the same.
Yes.
It's the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
calls it the real with a capital R.
Totally.
And he makes this distinction that Kant makes between
Yeah.
anything that we can capture in our framework
Yeah.
is only sort of representative of something beyond itself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's quite, it's interesting. Like on one level, I mean, one could listen to this and think about like, well, this is just kind of splitting hairs. However, it seems that the way that you see this translates in the way you live on some level, right? Like, and I think I notice as we're talking about it, I notice like, I'm realizing, God, this is a koan I've been sitting with for a long time. But lately it's been really there. And I think you can get at it something, actually by Rilke has a poem. Marion Rilke, you're familiar with Rilke, right?
I've used a passage of Rilke's once with faculty members in something in a Lectio Divina
Yeah,
experience.
yeah, yeah. He's
And it
amazing.
was about, yeah, and it was about our not knowing how much we don't know. And I forget how Rilke
Yes,
worded it, but it was
yes.
such an opening for us all. It was really
Really
wonderful.
tuned into that
Oh,
place. And he wrote this little poem for his tombstone. I think it's on his tombstone. I don't know if it actually he wrote it for his tombstone. I don't know if it actually made it to his tombstone. But so think about this of like all the things that Rilke put on his tombstone. This is what he wanted on his tombstone, right? All the things he wrote, right? He says, and it's this. And I'll say it a couple of times. It's like a short little statement. It says, "Oh Rose, such pure contradiction, delight in being no one's sleep under so many lids." So I'll say it a couple more times,
oh my God.
right? You felt that like, oh Rose, such pure contradiction, delight in being no one's sleep under so many lids. Oh Rose, such pure contradiction, delight in being no one's sleep under so many lids. This kind of, right? I think what I hear in that, like through thinking about that for like, 1,001 years or so, right? What I hear in that is this mystery about, if we say the rose, if we say just there's the center of the rose, and we'll say the center is like the oneness, right? And then each leaf, right, reveals this oneness, and then the leaves fall off and the thing dies. The oneness is not, we can't really say that that's the oneness anymore. There's this no one sleep under so many lids. That's a pure contradiction. And I think what he was kind of getting at that is that on some level, like there is this this oneness has this quality of it is one by virtue of its many in many respects. But I know, like it seems to matter whether or not we say that thing that's the same, what we mean by same, and what we mean by is. But it seems that there's this intimacy between its revealing that also conceals it, right? Like its unique disclosure that is also a concealing of that which it discloses. It comes and it's this intimate, it feels very intimate to me.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. That is a koan, all right.
Yeah,
Um, and it kind of reminds me of like the Diamond Sutra. I don't know
yeah,
if you're familiar with that one.
I-
I'll just give you one line or
yeah,
one or two lines from it, which I can't rehearse the way you did. It's not really the lines, it's a paraphrase, but it's
yeah.
like, no one's born, no one dies. There's no Buddha, there's no suffering, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Uh, and
yeah,
that's like no one sleeps beneath all those eyelids where
yeah,
people close their eyes and sleep at night,
yeah, yeah,
So that's that emptiness thing,
yeah,
um, which is kind of like fullness in the rose.
totally,
It's
totally.
kind of this
What
stuff
I
has
love about it
trans.
is you can't, like, what I love about it and I hate about it is I can't have it. It's like it,
Yeah, because having that's the having mode and the being
yeah,
mode. The
yeah,
rose is in the being mode.
yeah,
And we're the kinds of beings for whom our existence is in question.
yeah, yeah,
We are we have this disposition to want to have
totally.
and control everything. That's the left brain,
Yeah,
McGillicuddy.
yes, totally,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah, yeah,
Rilke's really good at that, at kind of like reminding
yes,
you
yes,
about the other side.
yeah. In this way, yeah, Rilke did stuff with language that I don't know if anyone really understands what exactly or how he did what he did, but like it's funny because a lot of people go through school and poets go through school never really reading Rilke. And it's not because people don't like Rilke, it's just nobody knows where to put him. Like he, on one level, he wrote a book, right? Like the Nautilus Bridges, I think, is the most modern, avant-garde modern book you could ever read, right? But yet he's on another level, he's a romantic. He has this romantic thread. He's got this mystical thread. He's got this very classical thread. He's kind of literally multi-dimensional, timeless. I'm fascinated with that guy. I'm fascinated with that guy. And talk about a
Yeah,
tortured soul. Holy shit. That guy was tortured.
yeah, he's a different kind of Renaissance
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. 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 He's like a, yeah. He's like a,
Da Vinci, let's say, was a left brain Renaissance man.
yeah. Yeah.
Rilke's more like a right brain Renaissance man.
Totally. Totally. And this is where he's similar to Heidegger in that sense, where it's like, because Heidegger's got, it's interesting because you would think that the analytic, you would think of the word rigor, right? There's a rigor that's really, I think, is admirable, right? Around that comes with that. But on another level, Heidegger was probably more rigorous than anybody. Like that was his thing, is this rigor. Like he had an endless rigor. But what was interesting is that what somehow I think what he was attempting to do, right? And that you don't know whether or not he did it or not. It's still under discussion, tells you that he was successful, right? Of through that rigor is trying to reveal what it's like, in some sense, reveal the I think they call it the photographic negative of being, right? That there's something that everything that we can say or point to that withdraws, yet it withdraws by it withdraws in the its withdrawal is the way the thing presences as what does withdrawal, and that is as constituting and determinate more than anything that we can have propositions about, something like that, right? And I think on some level he was, and I think Rilke in his own way was doing this too, is like in some way, how can we talk about context like without making it a content, right? I think that's a simplified way of talking about it. It's like, how can we get close to this this contextual thing that always withdraws, yet somehow is required for anything to be at all and to be meaningful at all? how can we see context or catch sight of that background and reveal it in such a way that we don't make it a foreground, which in some sense is concealing it if we make it a foreground? What is that kind of view, that place to stand, that you can kind of feel that ineffable without raping it of its ineffability, right? How can you preserve it in some respect? There's something about like Heidegger and the continental philosophers that are kind of circling around this sense that I just find it unendingly draws me and frustrates me.
Yeah, that was really well put. Um, I don't think I could have put that as nicely as you just did.
Mm,
But I completely resonate with everything that you said. What really, it's so weird for me that I've only recently come to realize that the continental philosophers, especially Heidegger and
yeah,
those close
yeah,
to that, that's what they were trying to do.
yeah,
And I'm like, I got robbed of an education. I
yeah,
got a PhD in philosophy
yeah,
without any of that. And that's what I needed. But you know
right.
what? I think when you try to take a step back and look at the way that your life has kind of cycled and why and how it all makes sense,
Mm,
getting the really solid training that I got in analytic philosophy
yeah,
will help me to have the kind of methodological
yeah,
acuity and rigor that Heidegger had to
yeah,
try to integrate with the rest of my experience. So,
totally.
but now that I know that there's that language and all those efforts going on in
Yeah,
Heidegger and all those people
yeah,
around him,
yeah,
which I have to thank John really for opening I mean, I've had some inklings about it I've been familiar with some phenomenologists since around 2012 when I went to, what was it called? What is that called? The NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities. They had this
yeah,
summer institute, these
right.
2 week intensive things that I
Yeah.
managed to get into. And it was Buddhists, um, analytic philosophers, and phenomenologists. Um,
Buddhists, analytic philosophers, and phenomenologists.
Buddhist philosophers and scholars, analytic philosophers, and phenomenologists like mine is going blank with some
Uh-huh.
names, but
Are you talking about a conference or?
that was a 2 week. They're called summer institutes.
Oh, interesting.
So
Yeah,
three people put it together, and then there was maybe 25 of us who were
yeah,
like junior scholars who were
yeah, yeah.
invited to come just for this cross pollination to have us all speaking to each other.
Oh,
And
great.
I had written a couple. I had published my first few articles were about Buddhism and free will, and
Oh,
that because I had that, I managed to get in
yeah,
because I had the Buddhism and the analytic philosophy that I was combining.
yeah,
So when I told you I got a job in community college, I didn't care what I published about. My dissertation was on free will, but once I could do
yeah.
whatever I wanted, I started going right back into the meditation and the Buddhism stuff.
Right.
But so I got into that thing, and Dan Zahavi, he was a phenomenologist. I don't know if you ever heard of him. And there was
Hmm.
what was it? Jay Garfield and a couple of other Buddhists and a bunch of analytic philosophers, a bunch of
Yeah.
phenomena. It was a great conference. So that's
Wow.
only about a decade. In the last 10 years, I realized that phenomenology, at least, is
Yeah.
really fascinating and interesting. And I
Yeah.
didn't know that when I was a student,
Yeah.
grad or undergrad. And
Totally.
so I've been slowly educating myself about that. But
Yeah.
then only once I met John, he's praising Heidegger, and I was like, I've always heard people say I can't get through Heidegger. West
Yeah.
analytic philosophers can't even read Heidegger.
Yeah.
They just don't have any pegs to hook his
Yeah.
language on.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Totally.
They're looking for
Totally.
propositions. They're looking for straightforward propositions. I have a friend
Yeah.
who's an analytic philosopher who, Evan Thompson. He's a friend of John's.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
one
Oh,
of those
yeah.
embodied guy up at University of Toronto.
Yeah.
He's one of the people who led that 2 week thing. Evan Thompson.
Oh, really?
Um,
Oh, great.
Thompson, Christian Kosaru. He does Indian philosophy and
Huh.
phenomenology, and with Mark Sideritz, Buddhist philosophy scholar.
Yeah.
Um, but one of my friends, um, when I mentioned Evan Thompson's one of his book Waking, Dreaming, Being.
Yes. Yes.
If you
Yes.
ever read it,
Yes. His second to last
friend
book.
of mine, Yeah,
Yeah.
this friend of mine who I won't mention his name because I don't want to out him for criticizing Evan. I mentioned the book to him. We were having an argument about something, and I mentioned I referenced the book. He said I couldn't get through like a few pages of that book. He doesn't make arguments. I want to see premises and conclusions. That's
Right.
that
Right.
propositional
Yeah. Yeah.
knowing.
Yeah.
But Evan Thompson is a really brilliant
Yeah.
analytic philosopher who uses those tools
Yeah.
along with other tools.
Yeah. Totally. Totally.
Right? But even
Right.
the stuff Evan does, like straightforward analytic philosophers, they have a hard time reading Evan.
Yeah.
So they can't go anywhere near Heidegger. They
Right.
just
Right.
they can't they don't have a hook into it.
You
So
know what's interesting is my understanding is, especially when you start to look at that guy who does the embodied mind stuff, Clark, is it something embodied mind? There's a bunch of analytic, and if you follow like
I know a Clark. I forget the first
Andy
name now.
Clark, I think is his name, right? It's all about, he's a kind of embodied mind, and it's interesting that, and even uh oh God, what was his other name? He was always the arch enemy of the Heidegger guy and UC Berkeley. Anyways, they're the analytics in some sense, because I think the thing that my understanding is that the thing that distinguishes the analytics from the continentalists is on some level the analytics kind of they'll take something like logic and they'll just relate to logic as if it's just there, and that you can kind of look at it and study it and like kind of ask questions about it. But what it seems like they don't account for or notice or something, right? At least the early analytics, right? Was the horizon that was given by horizons, right? That at one point logic wasn't, and there is a horizon, a historical sensibility that even had something like logic disclosed in the first place. And so what's interesting, what I heard you say, and I have a lot of respect for it, because I didn't come at this from an academic perspective, right? Like in some sense, I think that's been an advantage. On other ways, I think it's been a disadvantage for me. But what's interesting is as they kind of open this up, they start to hit these questions where they start spinning these unresolvable problems. Like free will seems to be one of them, right? Like all these, where they actually have to start admitting that they're in this circle, but what does that imply? And now you're starting to see them use even like continental words like intentionality, right? These kinds of things. And they don't like to cite the continentalists, right? But you can see this, in some sense, they are coming together a lot more, right? And I think Andy Clark is one person where that's really big time.
A lot of the at least even in the institutions of academia, a lot of philosophy departments and a lot of the publications that you see out of various different presses like Oxford University Press and everything,
Yeah.
they're all starting to recognize
Yeah.
that very narrow analytic, almost like a bias, like a parochialism
Yeah.
toward all the other kinds of philosophy is a mistake for the kinds of reason that, like,
Yeah.
you can do what Heidegger's doing. You can take these tools of
Yeah.
analysis
Yeah.
and apply them
Yeah.
to everything,
Yeah.
not just to logic and language and math.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can apply them to consciousness. You can apply them to being. You can apply them to everything. And that's the left, but there's also the right brain. I
Right.
love that
That
approach from that.
distinction is really useful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so you said, I don't know if it's a strength or a weakness that you came one way and I came another way. What was his name? Ralph Waldo Emerson. One of my quotes that I remember writing down when I was a teenager, I was hungry for knowledge and I used to read my mother read the Reader's Digest. I don't know if
Oh
you remember
yeah.
that little
Yeah.
magazine.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember it. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so she used to get it in the mail all the time or buy it. I don't know where she got it, but there was a quotable quotes page.
Yeah.
So there was all these famous quotes from famous people, and I always used to just go there and read that.
Yeah.
And I remember reading, I think this is where I found it, a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson. For every excess, there is a defect. For every defect, there's an excess.
Huh.
Nature always compensates, right?
Huh.
So you
Huh.
approached, you think, oh, I lacked the analytic
Yeah.
training, and I got
Yeah.
the analytic training, and I say, oh, I wish I had the continental training,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
so, but when you
Totally.
miss the one thing, you develop the other thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I do believe this, that if your intentions are good
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you have an intention toward
Yeah.
evolving and growing
Yeah.
and transforming and, anagogic intention, so to speak,
Yeah. Totally.
it's going to work. It's going to work no matter which way you go.
Yeah. It's like
This
your
way,
intention kind of
yeah,
informs the dance with the unfolding in some sense. Yes. Yes.
yeah, yeah. And the defect will be felt, and somehow or another, it'll be balanced out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Part of that optimism of mine.
Right.
So,
Right.
um, there was a time, I don't remember if, like I said, in my 3 conversations with John, if it was the one that you saw or whatever, but I went through a dark night of the soul kind of thing. So I had these really powerful, positive, mystical experiences in the first few years of my transformative, intense work.
Yeah.
And I was like a
Yeah.
serious yogi.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then after my satsang broke up and the 3 teachers went their separate ways, I was kind of like a spiritual loner,
Yeah.
but I was wide open and sensitive, and I started having negative experiences. And at one point, I just want to keep time. I know we have about 10 minutes left, right?
Uh,
Um,
I can go a little bit longer.
yeah, but at one point, I realized that I felt like a character in a supernatural film or something. Like I
Yeah.
was in my late teens, and I just realized that I had to shut down the valves or the faucets
Huh.
of my psychic
Yeah.
intuition and all that. Like I had to do an about face
Yeah.
for various different reasons.
Huh.
I was imbalanced. I was the way John, using John's language, that two worlds ontology.
Yeah.
I was only in the upper world, and I was completely ignoring
Yeah.
the lower. So I had to plunge back down. But
What?
I dove in.
Yeah.
I dove into the world again. Like I was
That's
living a
great.
monastic life, for a few
Yeah.
years, a yogi. I was a brahmacharya, celibate, vegetarian. Like I stopped doing drugs, all the things all that stuff I was when I
Yeah.
was a hippie.
Yeah.
I was like a serious yogi, and but like it opened up all this
Yeah.
psychic, spiritual, mystical stuff in me,
Yeah.
which it was almost like I was a 110 appliance in a 220 voltage thing after a while, and I just felt like, or the other way around somehow, and I don't know if I got that metaphor
Yeah.
backwards, but like I had too much energy and it was overwhelming me and burning me out, and I had to shut it off.
Wow.
And so because I had so much faith in that reality,
Yeah. Yeah.
I dove into the world completely fearless, knowing that when the time was right, I could come
Interesting.
back and reopen, and like
Yeah.
I had this deeper optimism.
Yeah.
Like, even though
Yes.
I had to do an about face, sometimes you have to go backwards in order to go forwards. And I had this total trust. And it was like cliff diving. Like
Huh.
you're not even a diver, but you do this cliff diving in Mexico. You ever see that? The film, like
Yeah.
hundreds of
Yeah.
like I cliff dove into the world, knowing
Yeah.
that I'm diving into the mud and
Yeah.
muck of the world,
Right.
but I'm
Right.
going to emerge. It was almost like that movie with What Dreams May Come. Did you
Yeah.
ever see that?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Hell to
Yeah.
rescue his wife or something.
Yeah.
Like I had that kind of faith. Like I'm going into hell, but I'll be okay. I'll come up
Yeah.
like that rose, out of the mud, the lotus.
Wow.
But that's part of it
Does it
because of
feel like
that.
that's what's happening now for you?
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's
I
been a
was gonna
very
say what you're
long and slow
describing, it sounds
process.
like a lot of what you're describing as of late.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a very long and slow,
Yeah.
you know, the
Yeah.
thing out of the mud, that lotus mud metaphor in Hinduism or Buddhism.
Right.
But and I told John I think in the last talk I had, it was almost like reincarnation within a lifetime,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
because it's like
Oh,
I've had a couple
totally. And it
different
sounds
types
like
of.
it sounds like it was pretty conscious on your behalf.
Yeah, yeah, it was in a
Yeah.
way, in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, there've been elements of my life that I didn't plan,
Yeah.
but from a larger perspective, they almost you
You
hear these
realize.
people, some mystics talk about
Yeah.
this view that souls overlook the lifetime that they might have, and they pick that
Yeah.
one because that's the curriculum they have to work on. I'm
Yeah.
not saying that I did anything like that,
Right.
but but
Yeah.
from a ex post facto
Yeah.
perspective, it almost is
Yeah.
as if I did that. You know what I mean?
Totally. Totally.
And
Kind of like, and at the time, from your perspective back then, was it kind of like, were you having experiences of like, oh, whoa, I'm going a little bit too far out there? Like, I know I've had experiences that I've touched on her. I'm like, that could shatter everything if I go any further or something. Were you having those kinds of experiences that were kind of scary or like,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. The word is awe, awe,
yeah,
awe-inspiring. Just
yeah,
a lot of. It was just too many mystical, psychic, precognitive experiences. Like almost 24. There was a period, and I don't know how long it was. You know that
yeah,
saying, if you remember the 60s, you weren't there. You
right,
know, so
yeah,
like I was so in the zone and in the flow and in an altered state all the time
yeah. I was
for
gonna
a few
say,
years of, a few years of my life that there were periods where I didn't fall asleep at night. I would lay down and go into an altered state where I was conscious all night and I was out of my body in other places, and then I would come back and it would be as if I woke up, and I would have these experiences where I would, in a dreamlike world,
huh,
be with somebody, and then they would tell me the next day that they had that experience. They had a dream of me with them, and this kind of thing. Like that's just a fragment of the kind of things that were happening to me on a
on a pretty
regular
daily
basis.
basis for a couple of years there.
Yeah,
Wow,
all the time. When
wow,
I'd be walking down the street or like going through my day, I'd be almost like I was surfing through spatio-temporal things that I had seen in the altered states when I was
yeah,
asleep
yeah,
every day. Kind of like, and I remember reading about this years later. Al Ghazali, famous Muslim mystic philosopher,
yeah,
monk,
yeah,
Muslim, saying that when you reach a certain state of spiritual, transcendental, transformative, whatever, that happens to you.
it starts, the two
And I,
worlds
I
start
don't
bleeding into each
Yeah,
other.
no,
Yeah,
every night you're seeing what's happening in your next day, and there's a kind of
wow,
it's almost like 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 those bulldozer wheel,
yeah,
that
yeah,
there's something
yeah,
about time and space that
yeah,
they're not static or linear. It's kind of like this
yeah,
weird thing happening all the time. And
yeah,
I felt like I was seeing people's auras and hearing people's thoughts. And, I
yeah,
had powerfully complex precognitive experiences where, the scientists say, oh, yeah, precognitive experiences.
yeah,
Everybody dreams hundreds of dreams every night. It's like if you take a deck of cards and you shuffle them over and over again, you're going to get ace 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10
yeah,
11 12. It's going
yeah,
to happen every now and then. You're going to
yeah,
get all 50. It's going to happen. It's statistically improbable and it's not impossible, but it's going to happen. And if it happens to you, you're going to think it was special, and
yeah,
therefore it's just coincidence.
yeah, yeah,
But I've had them that were so complex, but I've had so many of them.
yeah,
And I've had some of them where other people had the exact same experience as me,
yes,
and
yes,
then it was verified.
yes.
This kind of thing. So like
Wow. And
just so many.
this is like, so if just kind of getting kind of a sense of like the concrete situation of that, were you like living in a monastery during this period or?
No, no, no.
Oh,
I was that kid whose father was making fun of his long hair and his yoga clothes.
wow, wow,
I was a hippie in Bensonhurst. I was a
yeah,
yogi in Benson.
yeah,
Bensonhurst, Brooklyn was like the most Italian neighborhood in Brooklyn at the time.
wow, So you
Yeah,
definitely, there is definitely a big so your environment wasn't mirroring necessarily the
oh yeah, no,
holding
my
of that,
external
right? Yes.
environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's very weird. I literally know like heads of mafia families that were
Yeah.
friends of my father.
Yeah.
I know them by first name.
Yeah.
Those are
Totally.
my neighbors.
So what so it's interesting. Like what on one level I'm hearing I put myself in your position, and that sounds really like something. Well, on one level it was kind of like where it was where your path was taking you almost by design. Like they talk about that stuff and levels of yoga and all that kind of thing.
Yeah,
However, I can't quite tell if that would be good, if I would be experiencing that in that environment, if that would be as intense as you're talking about it. I can't tell if it's like if it's awe or awful.
yeah.
Like
Well, awful literally means full of awe,
yeah,
but
totally.
it has that negative connotation,
Yeah.
you know.
Like did it start to have a negative valence at a certain point, or like where you felt like you were losing touch with reality and that's why you kind of
I mean, I wondered at a few points whether or not I
yeah,
was schizophrenic
yeah,
because if you're seeing things that other people aren't seeing on a regular basis, chances
yeah,
are you're not sane, right?
totally.
Um, but I had so many other reasons to think that I was sane that
Yeah,
I didn't take that consideration too seriously
yeah, yeah.
for any period of time.
Well, I'm
Um,
schizophrenic and so am I.
yeah, that's a good
Been
one.
waiting to look for
But
wait for
yeah,
that place to use
yeah,
that.
no, but like I wasn't too worried about that. And I mean, every now and then I wonder retrospectively if that was really the case, but I don't think it was, because the reality tracking aspect of it and the kind of the coherentist
Yeah,
uh, evidential justifications for my experience being veridical. By
yeah,
coherentist, I mean from multiple domains, not just some kind of linear
mm,
evidence. You know,
yeah,
there's a kind of multiple ways that my experiences seem veridical on analysis, so much so that I couldn't dismiss them. And that's why it's been an enigma for me, especially when I learned analytic philosophy, that enabled me to doubt my experiences more than I ever did. I mean, I
yeah,
used to, prior to being exposed to things like Occam's razor and all these
yeah,
epistemic principles that put the burden of proof on me about my experiences,
yeah,
right? Like I can't prove that to anybody
yeah,
that I had those. You're right.
yeah,
The more natural interpretation is that I was not in my
yeah,
right state of mind. There were altered
yeah,
states. You do
yeah,
psychedelics. You were meditating and fasting and all this and that. You know, just like was it Saul of Tarsus? You know, he fell off his horse. He was out in the
mm,
sun for too long. He maybe had a frontal lobe lesion
yeah,
instead of a vision of God. You know,
yeah,
so who knows? But I never really thought that I was insane. But
mm,
my experiences started to have a negative valence, and also almost like a kind of sorcery thing. Like I thought that I
mm,
was in realms and exposed to and vulnerable to forces and possibly beings that were very powerful and negative.
yeah,
And I got really bad vibes about a lot of different things. And I was getting signs and omens that I was playing around with something that I wasn't ready to be playing around with, or
yeah.
that it was like I need to stop going in that direction and back up a little bit.
Some kind of knowing. There was a knowingness that you were getting
Oh,
too close to the yeah to the
yeah,
electric
it
shocking
felt like
source, so to speak.
yeah, like I was not, what do you call it? I wasn't evolved enough. It
Yeah,
was almost like a
for how
child
open
having a
you
machine
were.
gun. A
Yeah,
child with a machine gun. A child shouldn't have a machine gun. I was getting the sense that I was playing with things,
yeah,
playing with fire, playing with things that were
yeah,
over my head in a way.
yeah, yeah,
And that like I had managed to figure out how to open up stuff
yeah,
and get and have these abilities and whatnot prior to me having cultivated the spiritual wisdom for being in those spaces.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost
Yeah.
like when people take psychedelics
Yeah.
and you know, different people can take them and have different experiences. So some people like, I mean, I did it enough times
Yeah.
where I guess I was not psychologically fragile, so I didn't have, even if I had a
Yeah.
bad trip,
Yeah.
I knew that I was just tripping, and so it
Mm,
didn't, you know, I had
mm,
that mindfulness thing already,
mm,
just part of my nature,
mm,
where I was wise enough to know
mm.
it's only a trip. It's like a dream. So what's the
Yeah.
difference between somebody who freaks out on acid and someone who doesn't? Is
Yeah.
the person who freaks out on acid forgets that they're on acid.
Yeah. Yeah.
They
Totally.
they think giant water bugs are chasing them, you know. But
Totally.
the hippie happy guy's like, wow, man, there are giant water bugs,
Right.
you
Right.
know.
Right. 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 Right.
Wow,
Yeah.
awesome,
Yeah.
dude, you know, that kind of thing. So but that has to do with the level of your kind of organic wisdom that you've already got built into your psyche, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't have that and you have fragile
Yeah.
psychology and you take acid, you're going to have a bad experience.
Yeah.
So similarly, it was my spiritual work on myself
Mm.
was more powerful than acid because I was really ripe, maybe from having been somebody who had all those psychedelic experiences.
Right.
You know, they have a
Right.
formative effect,
Yeah.
but that I still wasn't evolved enough
Yeah.
for how quickly I managed to throw myself into this other place.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Totally. And it sounds like you had like some kind of natural disposition of an openness towards that, right? And then started to
Oh,
be able to know where the buttons were for it. But
yeah.
then also had a disposition that could recognize, if I go any farther with this, I don't know if if I'm ready for everything that I'm constitutionally open to experience. And so I really kind of get that sense of, eh, and what I'm hearing is, looking back, you could see yourself going, oh, let's go deep. Let's go down in the dirt. Right? Like,
Yeah.
I trust
I
this,
mean,
this is
originally,
real. And if it's real up here, it'll be real down there too. Right? Like until they
exactly.
meet. Yeah. Okay. So hearing
Yeah.
that, so it's really interesting. So hearing that, like getting that, all of that kind of sense of your history, and then hearing now, remembering and recalling what you said in the beginning of the conversation when you're describing answering my questions about what is it like having these two worlds come together. I'm like, I really have a different, like it strikes me like I'm hearing what you said in the beginning of the dialogue about what it's like for you. I'm hearing what it means at a level that like kind of it kind of gives me the goosebumps or something.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing us back. And I like that, hearing that thing. I remember that phrase from the circling weekend.
Oh yeah.
That's a way
Oh
of
good.
integrating.
Oh good.
Yeah.
It turns out I use that stuff, I guess. It's good to
Yeah.
hear that I say that stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but hearing you say what you just said and bringing me
Yeah.
back, you know, to where we began. Yeah. I guess what I would say is that that kind of modality, circling, is a wholesome,
Yeah.
integrated, grounded,
Yeah.
balanced, healthy,
Yeah.
supportive framing and container
Yeah.
for that kind of work
Yeah.
where it feels comfortable and safe and familiar and home to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like in that kind of space, um,
Yeah.
I'm feeling safe to let the flower open, which is that other side of myself.
That's fucking awesome to hear. I feel
Yeah,
just absolutely delighted
yeah.
getting that. Yeah.
No, even just talking to John, my first conversation with John, you know, just resonating with other minds that kind of get
Yeah.
this multiply
Yeah.
somehow or another, multiple ways in which these different things link up
Yeah.
and are positively transformative.
Right. Right.
Just like finding people who get that, even if you've
Yes.
got one part of it, John's got another part
Yeah.
of it, Chris has another part of it, the fact that this is kind of gestating together and
Yeah.
I found it, well,
Yeah.
I'm so happy.
Totally. And just the I don't know what the right word is. Just the, I think I'm getting just the existential significance for you, right? Of like, this is coming full circle. Like, this is you coming out of the mud, right? And
Yes,
this is confirmation of what you had faith in that allowed you to be able to dive so deep. Like, I'm hearing the confirmation of your faith, your instinct to dive so deep, and also what you touched in on. It's really, it gives me it's giving me the D logos pimples.
that's cute. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that language.
So nice to meet you. Getting to just come into contact with you and have our first conversation. It's really great.
Yeah, thank you. I feel really very, very happy and honored. I met you through some of your talks.
Mm,
I discovered you through John. I discovered John by accident,
mhm.
and I wonder about these accidents.
Yeah, totally.
Carl Jung calls them synchronicities.
Yeah, yeah,
The resonance of all this stuff that's coming together. I don't think it's an accident.
yeah,
I think it's
yeah,
part of a kind of
yeah,
awakening.
yeah,
Like, we're all coming out of some kind of mud
yeah.
into
And this
some kind
kind of
of connectivity.
this kind of turning thing with that you just did with your hands. I find myself doing that a lot too. There's something about this turning. Yeah. And
That's a
this.
kind of flowering,
Yeah.
opening, arriving, which is moving toward the light.
Yeah. So good. So good talking with you. So let this be the first, this is just the beginning. Let's connect
Awesome. Yeah,
again.
well, look, I love the Circling Institute and
Right.
I loved you before I met you.
Oh,
So
great.
and I'm really happy that we're
Yeah,
having these. So this is great.
me too.
I'll definitely come back whenever I'm invited.
Okay. You got it. Get ready.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Yeah.